All right, we left off talking about the upper layer of our epidermis called the stratum corneum. Recall, this is I hate to say the dead layer, because in our stratum lucidum, those cells are not living. There's no nuclei, no organelles. So this is the most superficial of our layers, and it is in fact dead cells. And depending on the thickness, you can have many, 50 plus layers, or you can have a few, as we see in thin skin. But these dead layers are often referred to as squams, because what do we call and classify in histology flattened cells are what type? Squamous, so it makes sense that we are squams. And as we look at the bottommost layer, the bottommost cells of our stratum corneum, we still are attached to our neighbors via desmosomes. These lateral junctional protein complexes that keep cells attached. But as we get further up and closer to the surface, we lose those attachments, making it much easier for those cells to fall off. And when you shed these dead cells, that's called desquamation. And that happens continually throughout the day. Now, we often see shedding of our skin best when we get a sunburn and then we're removing more of the layers of skin. And that's pretty easy to see. Now, I also want you to understand that desquamation is different than a clinical procedure you may be a part of if you are in a burn ward of a hospital. And when you have severe third-degree burns, then you've got a lot more of the skin that has to be removed so that the healing can take place. That's called debridement. And again, we'll talk about that as the end when we talk about more clinically related issues. So here we can see all of our layers of our epidermis. The bottommost layers, the basal spinosum, represents the bulk of the living layers. You see how the granulosum is very easy to pick out? And often when the corneum, these layers, these dead layers, when they separate from one another, the lucidum will still remain attached to the granulosum. So do you see that light, thin layer just above the granulosum? That's going to be our stratum lucidum that again is help providing a waterproof layer for our skin. Now let's talk about some of the cells and what they do. The bulk of your skin cells are going to be keratinocytes. And again, as we see different cells in your bodies with different lifespans, red blood cells, 120 days, cells that line your stomach, they turn over every 5 to 7 days. Your skin is a lifespan of about 20 to 30 days, about 1 month. From the stratum basal until the point the cell is lost, you've got about 30 days, which means your skin's growing pretty fast. And some of you notice at different points throughout the year, your hair and your nails will grow faster or slower. And a lot of that deals with hormones and your diet and your overall health. So your skin cells are growing fairly quickly. Why do we call them keratinocytes? Because they're filled with keratin. That is a specific intermediate filament that is characteristic of epithelium. I don't want you to think keratin's only found in skin. Keratin's found in your epithelial cells. Just like the intermediate filament desmin, we'll talk about that in muscle because it's characteristic of muscle. But it's the one that gets concentrated in these cells and provides this fairly tough, scaly appearance to our dead cell layer, the surface of the skin, as well as the very densely packed keratin layer of your nails and of your hair. But keratinocytes, that's the bulk of what we see when we look in our epidermis. Now notice this has a different stain to it. This is going to be staining another cell type that we see in our epidermis that provides the coloration to our skin, but that's going to be a nice boundary line that separates our epidermis from what is all this tissue that we're looking at. See my pointer here? What is this layer? It's beneath the epidermis, so it's the dermis. That's the dermis. We can see our connective tissue, the collagen flowing around in the epidermis. Now, a cell type you may not have talked about in lab that we find present in the epidermis, an extremely important cell type, although not many of our cells are going to be. The Langerhans cells are a part of the immune system. Now, sometimes they're referred to as dendritic cells because they have a lot of processes. Because basically these cells reach out and they grab pathogens, they grab cellular debris, they process it. They're like the vacuum cleaners of the skin. Did you talk about macrophages in lab? Okay, these are like macrophages. They develop from sort of the same stem cells, but they end up in the skin. And just like macrophages, Langerhans cells are antigen-presenting cells. Go ahead and commit this APC to memory because you will see this again and again and again throughout the body, especially in 239 when you get to the immune system. Antigen-presenting cells. Macrophages gobble up pathogens, and they go around into the immune system cells, especially lymphoid organs, where you have a high concentration of antibody-producing cells and T cells. And macrophages go around with this particle, this foreign particle displayed, and they walk around to the immune system cells and go, hey, do you know what this is? Do you know what this is? And when it finds the immune cell that can recognize that specific pathogen, that immune system cell becomes activated, and now you mount an immune response against that specific pathogen. So it makes it much more rapid and much more easy to activate an immune response rather than wait for those immune system cells to accidentally walk into the area of the skin to where we might have pathogens. Because really, when you think about one of the first places that pathogens are going to invade the body, it makes sense it'd be the skin, right? Why would it make sense it's going to be the skin? This first layer of defense, it's in contact with the environment, but what's the largest organ? The skin. You've got more surface area of the skin than any other organ, so for those reasons and those reasons alone, you need an additional step in the immune system to mount that response. Now, another cell type that, again, you may not have gotten in lab are Merkel cells. Merkel cells we're going to see in some of the deeper layers down in the basal. Merkel cells are going to be essentially your pressure receptors. And so we call them mechanoreceptors. When you apply pressure to the skin, it's as if you are going to be squeezing these cells almost like a sponge, and they are going to secrete chemicals that can then stimulate a sensory neuron to send a signal to your brain that says, hey, something's touching me. Something's putting pressure on my forearm. I have pressure on my back. That's giving you your sense of what's going on in your environment. So in a way, they're almost like modified nervous system cells. But in fact, they are epithelium. They are part of our skin. Their function is just similar to what we would see with the nervous system. So here we see our Merkel cells. Do you see how they're down in what we refer to as our epidermal papillae? These little projections that come down. We have blood vessels that course up in our dermal papillae. But then here we have our neurons, our nerve cells, and they interact with those Merkel cells such that when these cells, pressure's applied to them, do you see these little black spots in this illustration? Those are also desmosomes, these junctional complexes, so they're directly connected with our keratinocytes that you see here with the letter K. So as pressure is applied and these cells all get squeezed into a smaller space, that's also going to squeeze on our Merkel cell, and all of these vesicles that contain chemicals, and here you can see that they're being released, stimulating this sensory neuron to then fire a signal to the brain that says something's touching us. And so in a sense, when we get to nervous system, we will refer back to the Merkel cell and say, hey, this looks like a synapse, a connection between neurons and other cells. Now, this one you've probably heard about. You may not have heard of Langerhans cells or Merkel cells, but you probably have, in fact, heard of melanocytes. And melanocytes are going to be those cells that provide the coloration to your skin. Now, the melanocytes are going to be at the bottom layer. But they have numerous processes, as you can see in our illustration, that actually extend up into the stratum spinosal layer. Now, these processes aren't just for making contact, touching these cells, but these processes actually pass along vesicles. And these vesicles are filled with melanin. This is the pigment that we have in our skin. And so, by passing an entire portion of the process, these vesicles, this is called a cytochrome type of secretion. The keratinocytes in your skin will actually endocytose these packages of melanin, entire portions of the cell. And as they do so, the melanin either stays intact in the vesicle or it gets released into the cytoplasm, and it essentially surrounds or forms an umbrella over the nucleus. Why would you think it would be important to put an umbrella over the nucleus? And what are the two reasons that people really use an umbrella? Number one, when it rains, right? When have you ever otherwise used an umbrella? Shade, to shade yourself from the sunlight. Why does the nucleus need to be shaded from sunlight? I mean, is the sunlight actually going to penetrate those deep layers of the skin? Ultraviolet radiation does. And what does ultraviolet radiation do to DNA? Damages it, potentially leading to a mutation. So in a sense, this is your protection for your skin. So as you get that suntan and your skin gets darker and darker, what is your skin actually trying to do? It's trying to protect you from the sunlight exposure that you're voluntarily doing. Oh, the more ultraviolet radiation you're exposed to, the more melanin you're going to produce. Have you ever seen those social media people that their skin is like leather? Because it's nice to tan now, it's attractive now, but when you get older, it's just going to be leather, like saddle leather. It is ugly. And your skin can only protect you so much. So the darker you get, that's your skin's way of saying, okay, you're not protecting yourself. We're going to try to protect you better, but there's only so much your skin's going to be able to do. And you may end up with one of the forms of skin cancer that we'll see toward the end. So, more UV radiation, the darker your skin, and the greater number of our melanocytes. Here we can see a melanocyte sitting in our stratum basale between our keratinocytes. The process is extending up into the keratinocytes in the spinosum. And you see how some of the cells have these intact melanosomes, these vesicles. But then also, the melanin can be released from those melanosomes and surrounds the nucleus of our cells. Notice it's just in the stratum basale and just in the lower layers of the spinosum. Why are those the only layers we really need to have the protection? Why don't we need the protection for our keratinocytes further up in the spinosal layer? The ones that need protecting are the ones that are undergoing what? Cell division. They're undergoing cell division, which means they're also replicating their DNA, which makes their DNA more and more susceptible to damage. Even though they're undergoing this at night, typically, we still need to protect our DNA from the ultraviolet radiation. So in this particular histological slide, the dark staining material is going to be the melanin. And you see how most of it's at the basal layer? But then you also have some melanin extending up between the cells and over the nuclei of the cells in these lower spinosal region. So melanin, melanocytes, protective and trying to protect you from the ultraviolet radiation damaging you may in fact be doing to yourself and the skin. Now, our next layer, the dermis, it's not as complex as the epidermis as far as layers go. But we have a lot more stuff going on in the dermis. And so when we look at this bottom of our two layers, remember epidermis and dermis are our two layers of skin by definition. Hypodermis is just connective tissue that holds our skin on. We're going to divide the dermis into the papillary layer and the reticular layer. Now the papillary layer is going to be that portion where we see these projections going down from the epidermis, like these rolling hills, and then we see also the same structure with the dermis with these projections moving up and down. That's so that these layers will do something that's called an interdigitate. So if you think of your digits being your fingers, how would you interdigitate your fingers on both hands? You put them together. And as you put your fingers together, the only way you're going to move your fingers is to move them apart, up and down. You're not going to move them side to side because they're locked in place. And so our papillae, the papillae of the epidermis and the papillae of the dermis, lock the epidermis and the dermis together so that there will not be lateral movement. Because when you think about your body, what part of your body is getting more stress from the environment than any other, than the skin? Well, there's not one. And so as you push and pull on the skin, if you didn't have these papillae, these pegs, locking the epidermis to the dermis, your skin may, in fact, the epidermis may slide off the dermis just from sheer pressure of material pushing against your skin. So this is why if you're going to damage your skin, you're going to damage epidermis and dermis. You're not necessarily going to damage one over the other unless you have some sort of disease that loses the connection of the bottom layers of the epidermis with the dermis, and then it creates these blisters and it bubbles up, but it's not going to go side to side. So here we can see that separation. And I meant to bring in some egg crates. Have you seen those 2.5 dozen square egg crates you get in the store? How they go up and down? If you put one inside the other, you're not going to slide them side to side. And that's exactly what's happening in our papillary layer. These pegs, these bottom of the egg crates of the epidermis, fit in the exact places for those same peaks and valleys of the dermis, so that those two layers are not going to slide relative to each other. They're stuck in place. And so that's the function of the papillary layer. It's to keep our skin from essentially sliding off. Here again, we can see our papillary layer. This is a nice layer showing very regularly arranged epidermal papillae moving downward, sort of irregularly shaped dermal papillae moving upward. But we can see this all along the length of our skin. Now, here's a question. I think you can even see it in this, so I'm just going to ask you. We're not going to have any pictures on the test. But what do you think you would call this line running right there, that dark line? Stratum granulosum. See how easy that one is to pick out? So the granulosum is, to me, the easiest, other than the basal right along the bottom, and you'd know that just because it's on the bottom. What is this layer? That's going to be the dermis, and what is all this fatty stuff down here? That's the hypodermis. Epidermis and the hypodermis. Now, the business end of our dermis is going to be the reticular layer. Again, not because we have so many different layers, but because of all the stuff that is present in our reticular layer. And stuff not meaning our connective tissue elements. So we have dense irregular connective tissue, primarily collagen, But we also have elastic, because your skin has to move. Your skin is flexible. You don't just pinch your skin and it stay, pinched. It rebounds back into its original position. That's because of the elastic fibers that give that rebounding effect, whereas collagen resists being stretched too much. So your skin is a little stretchy, but not too much. Now, like we've seen in a couple of our illustrations in here already, we do find some adipose tissue, and I don't know what that O is doing there. Scratch that O out of there. Adipocytes? Yeah. Adipocytes. You do find those in the deeper layers of the dermis, even though most of your fat is going to be present in the hypodermis. But it's down in this layers where we find sweat glands, and we're going to talk about two different types of sweat glands, sebaceous glands and hair follicles. That's really going to define what we see in the dermis, as well as a ton of blood vessels and a ton of nerves. Now, we've already talked about our little smooth muscles that are attached to the hair, right? The erector pili muscles. And when they contract, what do you get? What do you see on the surface of your skin? Goosebumps. Goosebumps. That's just a consequence of the angle with which these muscles are attached, but it causes the hair follicle to be pulled downward and laterally to make the hair stand up, but as you do that, it puckers up the skin. So really, the goosebumps is simply a consequence of the skin and the hair trying to be moved upward. So here we see our 5 layers of our epidermis, and we see all of this material present in that layer of our skin, the dermis. So, let's talk about the nerves a little bit. We'll talk specifically about hair and hair follicles and glands in a minute. But we've got our nerves. These nerves are going to be receiving these chemicals from our Merkel cells. And we've also got a lot of other sensory components in our skin. So pain, pressure, heat, and cold, these are the principal senses that we're going to feel on the surface of our skin. So, I mean, we can have a light touch. We can have a pretty severe amount of pressure, pain, heat, cold, which makes it really interesting. What is cold? The absence of heat. It's like, what is dark? The absence of light. Well, we have receptors that can tell us when our skin is warmer than normal, but we also have receptors in the absence of heat that can tell us when our skin is not as warm as normal. Because our body temperature, remember, is trying to balance our body like everything else. What is the H word? Homeostasis. So, like everything else, we're trying to balance that out. So we need receptors to let us know, too hot, too cold. Now, we also have motor nerves. Now, let me explain. Sensory nerves, those are nerves that are bringing information to the brain about something going on, either inside our body, outside in the environment, bringing in information. Motor nerves are nerves that are taking information from the brain, sending it out to the body to make something happen. Hence the term motor. And so our motor nerves that are present in the skin, they are to cause our glands to secrete materials, more or less. But it's also to regulate blood flow. You remember how we talked about the skin helping regulate your body temperature? The radiator effect of the skin? So when you are hot, you're typically going to see the blood vessels, especially in your wrist, get larger and more prominent. You will see them better because they're getting larger to allow more blood to flow through the area that's closer to the skin to dissipate more heat. And likewise, when you get cold, they're going to constrict, cause less blood to flow through, and conserve more of your core body temperature. Now, did we talk about frostbite last time? That might have been in the second class. When you get so cold, You know, if you're stranded, you've been hiking in the mountains in the winter in Colorado and you get stranded, an avalanche or whatever, if you don't have proper cold weather attire, gloves, boots, and your fingers and toes start getting so cold and losing too much heat, your body is going to stop the blood going to your fingers and toes, and you end up with frostbite. How do you know you've had frostbite? What color do your fingers or toes get? They turn black. They turn black. It's not just they're frozen. It's that tissue is dead. It's necrotic because you have absolutely stopped any blood flowing to your appendages because your body's made a decision. Your body says, well, this idiot won't go build a fire or put on more clothes, so we are going to conserve our core body temperature to protect our heart, to protect our lungs, to protect our internal organs. We need those more than we need fingers and toes. And if you don't start getting warm, then it's going to say, okay, we need our core body temperature more than we need our arms and our legs. And that's all a consequence of your motor nerves and your nervous system saying, hey, we've got to maintain this core temperature at all costs. We're going to survive, and even if we have to do it without hands and feet. So that's the pinnacle of how we regulate our body temperature through our blood vessels. And so this illustrates that very thing. The dilation and the constriction of our blood vessels. So on the left, we've constricted those vessels because we're cold. We want more of the blood to stay in our deeper vessels to conserve that core body temperature. Whereas when we get really, really hot in the summertime, we're going to dilate these vessels in the skin, and we're going to allow that heat to be dissipated and lost to the environment. Now, when we get to the nervous system as well, we're going to talk about the autonomic nervous system. And one of the two parts of autonomic nervous system is the sympathetic nervous system, which we call the fight or flight. You probably are familiar with the fight or flight system. It's that system that goes into effect where you're at a red light and your light turns green, but a car runs a red light, almost takes the front of your car off, and you white knuckle the steering wheel instantly and your heart's racing. That's how fast this system gets started. It's to prepare your body to do something very active. And one of the consequences of activation of the fight or flight system is your blood will go to the deeper layers of your skin. You will not pass the blood into these capillaries that are present in our dermal papillae because more of your blood, in fact, 80% of your blood flow is going to go to your skeletal muscles because you're getting ready to do something. And you're going to need that blood and that oxygen and that nutrients. So this vasoconstriction, vasodilation, when you get that in circulatory, which is 239, you're already going to be familiar with it because we're going to talk about autonomic toward the end of the semester. But here's a practical case just in the regulation of body temperature, how your blood vessels either expand or they contract to either prevent heat loss or allow more heat loss to regulate your body temperature. So that's the control of our blood vessels in our skin, using our nerves that are present there, as well as our capillaries in our dermis. Again, have you begun to get an appreciation for how integrated the human body is? Even though we are talking about the integumentary system, which you might think is the most isolated of all, we've already included our muscular system, our circulatory system, our nervous system, and even our glandular secretory system. So nothing is independent, nothing is mutually exclusive as it relates to the functioning of the body. Now the hypodermis, not part of the skin, not an insignificant layer either, because it's going to act to protect and primarily provide you with an energy reserve. Now, this insulation part, I don't really like that because if I get cold, I don't want to be larger. I want to get a bigger coat. But your adipose tissue, those fat layers, those are important for insulation. I mean, especially when you look at some of our marine mammals. That's what they depend on. But also when we look at our hibernating mammals, they also depend on fat to sustain them during their months of hibernation. So those are ways that you can remember those two important functions. Unfortunately, where nature has decided to store the fat, it's not all that great. And as I look at this, guys, we store fat in our neck. You ever seen the big, what do they call that? The turkey gobble? Is that what they call that? Yeah. So in our neck, guys, we know abdomen, love handles, lower back.
I think that's definitely a girl thing, but all right.
What?
The love handles?
The love handles?
Yeah.
We didn't include that here. No.
That's the first place that girls gain weight is your belly and your love handles.
Well, see. Okay, that's what they said in the book. I'm not going to get into that whole thing because we think y'all are beautiful ladies, right, guys? Right? We're not going there. No. So, help me get out of this, guys. I almost didn't even put this on here. There are physiological differences. There doesn't necessarily need to be socially different things for male and females. I mean, certainly, in the workplace, I'm like digging myself a hole, right? Trying to get out of this. Equal work, equal pay, that sort of thing. But physiologically, there are differences. And so we begin to see them here in the differences in where fat is typically stored. Now, there's another difference that wasn't included in this book. But I taught comparative anatomy and have done a number of dissections in graduate school. We did gross anatomy as well. And guys, I can tell you this. The first place, guys, listen to me here. This is important. The first place fat gets stored in your body when you start to see the fat getting added on, especially for males, is around your heart. In the pericardium of the heart. When you dissect, one of the nastiest things in the world, we had this. It wasn't my cadaver, but there was this cadaver in the gross lab. He had to be 300 pounds. And when they opened his thoracic cavity, you couldn't find the heart. I mean, they dug for a day, scooping out fat just to get to the heart. And so all of that adipose tissue collected around the heart and that pericardial area, it's really going to impact cardiac function. So it's not just for aesthetics like we see here, but some real significant physiology. So, is there a way to get rid of adipose tissue? The only way to get rid of adipose tissue, well, there are two ways. To get rid of the fat, not reduce the number of adipocytes, the cells, but to reduce the fat that's stored in those cells, consistently burn more calories than you consume. And it doesn't, now we have food nutrition people in here? Any food nutrition people in here? Okay, plug your ears up for a second. Don't listen to what I'm saying. Or at least give me a chance to clarify after I say it. It matters less what you eat versus how much you eat. There was a guy that did this, I think it was 30 days or 60 days, where he ate nothing but junk food. Big Macs, hamburgers, chips, fries, the whole 9 yards. But he carefully calculated his calorie consumption. And in the course of that 30 days, he lost weight because he was exercising and he was burning more calories than he consumed. Now, for my food nutrition folks, what you eat does have an impact on your overall health. Do not just go out and think you're going to live on cheeseburgers. No. You've got to have your vitamins. You've got to have the essential amino acids. Low-fat diet is important. But the critical thing is burn more than you consume. That's the key. And if you consistently do that, then your body's going to adjust itself. The other thing you can do, I'm not a proponent of grazing so much, but if you ever feel hungry, then it's too late to eat. Your body should never feel hungry. So Eat larger meals in the mornings. Snack mid-morning, snack mid-afternoon. A protein bar, some fruits and nuts, those are always good. And then eat smaller meals in the evenings, and do not eat within 3 hours of falling asleep, that kills me right there. That bowl of cereal calls me every night before bed. I don't know why. But those things will help you. Now, the only way you're going to lose fat cells is liposuction. But the consequence of doing that, if you don't change your lifestyle, the cells that remain just get bigger. And they take up the space that the other cells you had sucked out occupied. So liposuction is not going to cure obesity if you don't change your eating habits and your lifestyle. So let me just say right now, exercise. You've got to develop a habit of exercise. And I'm not talking about going and running a marathon every day. I'm not talking about going in the gym for 2 hours every day and killing yourself. No, even if you walk 30 minutes a day, develop a lifestyle of exercise and activity. Not only is that going to help you be healthier, but it's going to help you relieve stress. And if you exercise, you sleep better at night. I didn't get to exercise last week. I was a grump. My family even said, when are you going to start working out again? Which is today, by the way. But you need to do that.
Why is it that the guys have it more than the girls? The build up around their heart? Is there like a
I've not read a specific reason why, but I mean, there's just those gender differences. Males typically in the general population, males are going to have more red blood cells, so their percent hematocrit is going to be higher on the normal range because males typically have a greater percent of muscle mass than females. So, I mean, there's just these genetic differences that we can't escape, and unfortunately that's one of them. Now, if you're morbidly obese female, you're probably packing it around the heart too. It's just that occurs around the males much sooner than you see that happen around females. All right, so there's our lovely yellow fat down in our hypodermis layer. Again, it's supposed to be there for a good reason, but depending on your lifestyle, if you've got a fairly sedentary lifestyle and you eat a lot, then you're going to start packing more and more of that in that hypodermal layer. All right, now let's talk about the glands. We'll start with sweat glands first. Typically, when you think of a sweat gland, you're going to be thinking of these that are termed apocrine sweat glands. You may also see them termed merocrine sweat glands. Merocrine is the mode in which the sweat is secreted. And sweat is secreted by exocytosis, as you see in our illustration. But our apocrine sweat glands are the most common that you have over most of your body. They're the ones that are going to make you sweat when you get hot to try to cool you down and try to maintain a normal body temperature. And this, among any other reason, hopefully will help you to remember to hydrate when you're out on a hot summer day doing something. Your skin is the largest organ, right? More surface area than anything else. And if you're sweating, do you see this number? You can sweat up to around 10 liters of sweat a day. 10 liters. Do you know how significant that number is? In the average human body, your blood, your circulatory system, in the average adult human, you have only 5.5 liters of blood. So you can sweat almost double your blood volume in a day. So stay hydrated. Stay hydrated. I would love to do an experiment one day to take blood samples from a class and just look at the state of hydration. I would wager that more than 60-70% of us are dehydrated right now. I would. I know I am. I've not drank water today. This is my first cup of coffee. So I know I'm dehydrated already. So stay hydrated. That is critical. Now, our second type of sweat gland. You may not have known that you had two types of sweat glands. You may not have known that this was called apocrine sweat gland. And the apocrine type of secretion means that portions of the cell are going to break off and release the material. Let's see, how can I put this delicately? These are the glands that provide that lovely scent of BO. And so typically, the armpits is where you have this lovely secretion that I like the fact that, it's odorless when it's first secreted, but the bacteria on the surface of your skin modify it so that a lot of times it just plain stinks. I don't know how else to describe it. Now, I'm getting this from my family members because I have this interesting condition in which I can't smell. It's called anosia. I smell nothing. So you can never tell me I smell because I don't. That was a joke. You can laugh. Sorry. It's a bad one. So, but I've been around enough people, especially when I've been outside with my chainsaw working, get real hot and real sweaty, and I come in the house and maybe I've had my shirt on too long, and I walk in and my wife will just go, whoo, go take a shower. I know it's not a pleasant smell. So I really, sex attractants, pheromones, studies and books say that this is how this evolved, that for our human ancestors, these were attractants, I guess musk. Guys, I don't think ladies like BO. So let's not try to go down that road. But these apocrine sweat glands, the second type of sweat gland that we have in the dermal layer of our skin, much more restricted in their location than our others. So here in our illustration, we see this miracrine sweat gland. That's our ecrine type. And this is what we're typically going to see in our skin. We can see that the glandular portion of our epithelium is in the deep dermis, and the duct of the gland snakes up to the surface of our skin and releases it at the stratum corneum. These two other types of glandular secretions. And again, I guess we can go from BO to earwax, So the ceruminous glands. These glands produce this waxy substance called cerumen. And in fact, cerumen is going to help primarily trap foreign material. Now, you do have hair that lines your auditory canal. And I guess through the day, you're talking, you're breathing, helps to move a lot of that waxy material either out through the external meatus, the opening of the ear, or in fact, you end up getting a cotton swab and digging it out. Now, for all of you earwax diggers, let me just tell you what I've heard various health professionals say. The smallest thing you should ever put in your ear is your elbow. Let me say that again. The smallest thing you should ever put in your ear is your elbow. So what does that mean? Don't put anything in your ear. Because how many people are going to be working in the ER and someone's going to come in with a Q-tip that has perforated their eardrum? You're going to see that. You're going to see that. Anyone listen to Kid Craddock show in the morning? I think JC or somebody actually did that. They were cleaning some of their audio stuff and stuck the Q-tip in their ear to just hold it while they were doing something else. And then when they leaned over, it jabbed. Yeah, it jabbed in there. Okay, if you're an ER nurse, you are just not prepared for the level of stupidity you're going to see humans perform, especially during a full moon and especially after alcohol is involved. But Sticking a Q-tip in your ear, that's largely going to be one of them. Now the last gland, other than, we'll get to sebaceous when we talk about the hair follicle, but mammary glands, these are a part of your skin. These are a part of the integumentary system. And so these are important certainly for mammals. That's how nourishment is provided for babies. And when you get into more and more of this discussion, if you happen to get into an OB ward and you become an OB nurse, you're going to see that the first secretions from the breast that are provided by the mom to the baby, I'm struggling because the word just left, colostrum, that's the first secretion. There's not a lot of milk protein in it. It's actually a clear secretion. But what that first milk actually is, and it's often called immune milk, is it's full of antibodies. Antibodies that can provide a temporary passive immunity for the baby. But those milk proteins are coming from the glandular epithelium that's provided in the breast. And again, that lactation begins with the same hormone that leads to the contractions of the uterus, that being oxytocin.